just recorded. Well, I didn't record because it wasn't recording. So I'll start over. So something that I like to talk about, unfortunate for my friends, is kind of the generational differences that we're seeing, because it's really, really interesting how distinct the sort of four present generations are within themselves. And so we have, if you're not familiar with kind of generations and stuff, I recommend, giving it a Google. It's pretty interesting, but it comes from a sociological, psychological kind of perspective. But it's very applicable in business and management, because not only do we see pretty significant differences in the way that the generations purchase and behave as customers in terms of, the effective marketing or buying preferences and, expectations when it comes to companies and their products. But we also see pretty big differences of the generations as employees. And obviously they're, based on generalizations, and it can be quite regional on what sort of characteristics can apply to these different groups. But it's really interesting. Something that I hear from my friends every now and again is, oh, but we're not like other millennials. I'm like, what do you mean we're not like other millennials? I refuse to leave school. This friend is on their third career change. This friend still lives with their parents. This friend recently quit their job of X years to go back to school. Like, we're all very much hitting a lot of the characteristics of millennials, where we don't commit to a certain career path. If we get into a career path that we don't like, we're more than happy, we don't have that fear of changing it because, how can it get worse sort of thing. And there's, a lot of the times we'll see in leadership roles or management roles in a lot of companies, boomers, or people from the baby boom generation, the post-war generation, where, they're in these management roles and they're just like, oh, well, there's no work ethic, there's no dedication. And it's, not the work ethic, but the dedication is true, because millennials are much less likely than boomers and Generation X to commit to a company. In previous generations, it would be like, oh, well, I've already been here for 10 years. I don't want to lose my pension, or, oh, I don't want to lose the job, or whatever the case may be. Where we're seeing in millennials, it's just like, well, there's no such thing as job security, so why would I stay somewhere that I'm not happy, or this isn't what I want? We're seeing a higher value on work-life balance, where people are willing to take less in terms of financial compensation, to have more in terms of some of those non-income benefits, and prioritizing the self rather than the work. I've said to people before, is like, I do not dream of labor. I have been waiting to retire every moment of my life. I am not passionate about working. There are things that I happen to do that I enjoy, and I just happen to be paid for them. But that's not, I don't assign my worth to my work. And depending on your perspective, that might be lack of dedication, lack of direction, lack of work ethic. And now that Gen Z is coming into the workforce, we're seeing a lot of those behaviors or perspectives of millennials be, increased almost in Gen Z. And it'll be interesting to see how the four, because it's the fact that we have 4 generations all in the workforce, it's causing a lot of conflict. But it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out. And so speaking of, the change in those 4 generations, we're also seeing a bit of a shakeup in who's in leadership. If you've ever watched The Intern, it's a movie with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway where, he's a senior citizen who comes into an internship position at a company where everyone at the place is much younger than him, and he was, adjusting to that culture of where his experience and insight was not of it ended up being of use, obviously, like that's the whole plot of the movie, but he didn't know a lot, and that kind of gap of, I don't know how to use the tablet, or I don't know how to open a PDF, or all of those things that we're kind of seeing create a divide of knowledge and skills. And the knowledge piece and those skills and the changes in technology and the requirements of different positions is, one of those HR challenges where employees need to constantly be upgrading their skills and constantly be retraining and training themselves to try and keep up with the technologies. You might have a 4-year computer systems degree or whatever the case may be, but if you're not updating as quickly as the technology is updating, your background's obsolete, your degree is obsolete, and it'll be better to hire someone who has a fresher degree and less experience because you weren't able to keep up with the knowledge. So they call these sort of like thinking positions or knowledge worker positions where you're not, doing hands-on physical labor or, face-to-face customer service or any of those things. Instead, you're doing, computer-based work or coding or, whatever the case may be. And, you have to keep up with what's happening outside of your industry that has an impact on your industry. So that's presenting challenges for people who haven't kept up with their skill sets, or for people who are swapping around a lot between positions. Something else that has been creating some disruption in the workforce, the gig economy and contingency or contract working. And it's giving a lot of people some freedom to kind of set up their own income streams, have multiple side hustles, and work for themselves, either as a freelancer, independent consultant, driving for Uber or Instacart, DoorDash. Those are kind of some of the kind of newer examples of gig economy, but there's lots of work, and it's been around for a long time, but we're seeing it become more and more popular. Not only in these new businesses that are coming up as, disruptors to traditional business, but also traditional businesses moving to that contingent workforce where instead of hiring full-time employees, they hire by the contract. That's something that, there was a report last year, I think, about the main 5 universities in the province have more contract workers than they ever had, and part of that is, they don't have to pay benefits and provide job security, and they don't have to go through the any of the unions because the contract workers aren't members of unions. Some of them are, like part-time academics are contract workers, but they are also members of union. But anyway, that's the whole point. So there are problems with this contingent workforce of the gig economy because the employers or the people who are contracting them don't have to provide a lot of those elements that they would be responsible for otherwise. Healthcare coverage, or paying into DEI, or workplace safety or workers' comp if someone wants to get hurt during a contract. Like, all of those things kind of get muddy, and figuring out whose responsibility is what is a bit more of a challenge. So, the workplace itself is changing. Obviously, the fact that you're looking at me via video right now and not a discussion in class is perfect evidence of how workplaces are changing. Now, they'd already been changing, with the gig economy and people doing telecommuting or, working from home, etc. That had already been happening, but obviously now pandemic life has kind of forced everyone to shift. So it's now a case of, okay, what's it going to look like post-pandemic? Are places that have been able to function reasonably well online going to stay online? And I'll just say right now, the plan for the university, assuming I don't know what the target vaccination rate is, but assuming vaccination rates, we're supposed to open back up in the fall. Anyway, you didn't hear it from me, even though it's in a recorded video. But the point is, businesses rely on their employees, and employees are changing, the workplace is changing, society is changing, and a lot of these businesses, especially big businesses, are not as flexible or as responsive as they need to be. That being said, small businesses with, stubborn long-term owners or bosses, or, agricultural businesses, or, traditional places that aren't able to change due to stubbornness, less than, incompatible organizational structure and poor responsive attributes, that also causes problems. So it's interesting. There's lots going on, and HR it can be interesting. I feel like a lot of people dismiss it as, oh, well, it's just this, but there's more to it because there's a real human element in it. And we'll get more into that kind of human element and the psychological and sociological stuff in the next module when we talk about motivation and satisfaction. So I'll wrap it there.